All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to our another wonderful Growth Monday. So, we're looking forward to a great Growth Monday today. We're talking about how you can succeed after burnout. So, this is an interesting subject here, and I've got a great guest that's going to be talking about this with us. This is actually she's an expert in this field, so I definitely I'm looking forward to this session. Learn about how we can succeed after burnout. Many of us have experienced burnout before. Maybe you've experienced burnout before, or someone you love has experienced burnout before. And we're going to talk about some effective strategies, ways that not only we can bounce back, but actually come out better, right? Better than when we went into the burnout situation. And I'm just going to double check and make sure that we are online. I'm looking right now. We're going to be looking out for your comments. Now, you may be watching this on YouTube, on Facebook, or on LinkedIn, but I'm going to be looking live at your comments on the LinkedIn platform. So if you do want to get involved in our discussion, feel free and jump over to that. And we will also look at your comments on YouTube and Facebook later as well. Looks like we are live. I am so happy about that. Yes. Okay, so welcome to the show, Dr. Sharon Grossman. You're a burnout coach. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And I know it's burnout coach, but you're going to help us get out of it. You're not going to help us burn out, but you're going to help us get rid of that burnout. Is that right?
Well, we'll see where we get to, but I have a lot of things I can happily share with your audience. And of course, I encourage people to put your questions into the chat so that we can really address the things that you're curious about.
Absolutely. Yes, that's what it's all about. And I'm bringing it up on the big screen on my iPad here. We're looking bright and clear here. Wonderful. I want to be able to check your comments. Let us know where you're signing in from, what city, what state, what country, and we'll be sure to do our best to acknowledge all of your comments. So thank you for joining us today. Now, just to get us started, I'm very curious, Sharon, what kind of got you even interested in this subject? There's probably some kind of personal story behind this, and we may resonate with it because we probably all have felt some level of burnout at some point. But
Mm.
what was it that kind of got you into this whole subject of becoming a burnout coach?
Yeah, so it's kind of quite different, I would say, from what you would normally expect from a burnout coach because I think every single person I've met to date that is a burnout coach or works around the subject of burnout in some capacity has actually experienced burnout themselves and they want to share their experience with others, what they've learned, and it's kind of like that hero's journey that we always hear about. And my story is a little bit different in that I grew up really hearing the adults around me talk about how they weren't very excited to go to work. And I remember as a kid thinking, is that all there is? I didn't really want to grow up to be this like miserable adult that didn't have a sense of purpose. And so I was very intentional about the way that I approached my career and my life. And I would say that I was very much driven by a value, which is having a certain kind of lifestyle, right? I didn't want work to be the only thing in my life. And I also didn't want work to make me miserable. And so I really took a lot of time to figure out what it is that I wanted to do. And once I figured it out, then obviously things kind of shaped from year to year. It wasn't like I just started one thing and I went through with it. So I studied psychology because I was very much interested in what makes people tick and what goes on in people's minds and why do we do the things that we do, right? I find psychology very fascinating. But I started out working for a nonprofit. And when I reached really a ceiling there in the organization, and I was trying to look outside and try to figure out what is my next step as a professional, I really didn't like any of the options that were available to me. It always meant that it was going to be sacrificing my value of lifestyle. It either meant that I would
Mm.
have a very long commute or I would work with a population that would be like really stressful and not a good fit for me, or it meant that I wasn't maybe they'd want me to work nights and weekends, or there was always something there that just wasn't a fit. So I was very much focused on fit in terms of how I would feel on the job because I didn't want to end up like one of the adults that I grew up listening to. And when I realized that all the options out there actually didn't fit what I was looking for, I realized that I had to go out and create it. And hence, that's how I became an entrepreneur. But I was also very worried about going into this field as a solo practitioner because I had heard so much as a grad student about psychologists in private practice burning out. And so I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to go do this, then I have to do it in a very intentional way. And so when I first started out, I had my office about a 10-minute walking distance from my gym. So I would make my own hours and I would go out and work out in the middle of the day and make sure that I got, my health taken care of. And I just had all these routines and different strategies in place to make sure that I could do the work that I enjoy doing, but also take care of myself in the process. And then that eventually evolved to I want to really work with people who are super high achievers and what can I help them with? Because those are the people that I enjoy working with the most. And one of the things that they really struggle with often is burnout. And I'm like, well, I've been doing this psychology work for 20 years. I've been sharing with all of my clients tips and strategies about what helps them be more in control of their mind, how they can leverage a lot of their own power and really take back control of their life. So how can I now put that into use for people who are struggling with burnout, right? And that's when I
Right.
wrote my book and kind of put all those tips and strategies out there for people so that they can coach themselves. And now it's about really using my knowledge to educate people on burnout because the majority of people actually don't realize that they're burned out until it's far too late. So that kind of
Ah.
brings us to present day of how I got here and why I'm here talking about burnout right now.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. So basically, from your perspective, it's not that you personally experienced burnout, it's what you observed in those around you when you were growing up that look, I don't want to go down that road. So you were very intentional in what type of career or business you pursued. Is that a fair
Exactly.
assessment?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, as you did your research for your book, I'm curious, what were some of the biggest causes for burnout to begin with? What are you seeing that are some of the triggers or causes that leads a person to burnout? Or perhaps what are some of the things you observed, even in your anecdotal research and looking at your own situation with adults around you?
Well, that's a really important question. And the reason I say that is because it's kind of like if you think about anything else, like depression or anxiety, and you ask yourself, why is Schmo depressed? And while we know the outcome is depression, we really don't know what got that person there. And there are so many different factors that could have been contributing to that end result. And I think the same is true about burnout. But what I have
Okay.
found is that typically it falls under three different buckets. These are what I call the biggest kind of contributing factors. The first is your programming. So what I mean
Okay.
by that, it's really those early life experiences that have shaped the way that you view yourself, other people in the world. It's those beliefs that are now driving all of your actions. So we often see people who feel really burned out at work. They quit their job, they go find another position, and the same thing happens over again. And so you might be asking yourself, why is this person getting burned out everywhere they go? Or they leave, they go on sabbatical like we're seeing now, they take some vacation or time off, they come back, they feel better because they've had that time away and they've maybe recharged their batteries a bit. Then they burn out a second time and then a third time. And so you might ask yourself, why is this person burning out over and over again? It could be that there is some programming in place that is leading you to do the same kinds of things over and over again. It might be that you believe that you are not worthy, and that came from some early life experiences that have shaped how you see yourself, right? So there's a deeper kind of psychological meaning here. And what that means is that so much of this is subconscious. We're not even aware that we have these things that lead us to behaving in a certain way in the work that we're doing, the way that we show up. And so we end up creating these results for ourselves. And unless we address that programming and we really realize that, hey, like I don't have to keep pushing myself to prove that I am worthy at work. If I can change that belief or that programming, then I already feel worthy. And now I show up differently to work. And now I don't engage in the same behaviors in the same way. And I can prevent burnout. So that's one example of a contributing factor, but that's perhaps one of the most important ones, right? One of the things we're super in the know about or more aware of typically are our environmental stressors. But we may not even be aware of how we have multiple environmental stressors and how they come together to really deplete us. And that perhaps could be one of the reasons we're burning out. We see this a lot with working moms, for example. You have people who are really burned out at work, right? They're driving themselves or they're in certain industries that are really
Right.
demanding. And then on the work front, or sorry, on the home front, you would think that would be my escape from work where I can kind of recharge and everything else. But then if if home life is really stressful because now you've got kids that have really high demands, like maybe you have 5 kids, which I've now interviewed several people that have had 5 kids to come home to after a whole day at work, or you have twins or triplets, or maybe you have kids with special needs, or maybe there's some other thing going on, like maybe you have health issues that you have to contend with, or maybe you have a lot of depression and anxiety and that makes life that much more challenging, or maybe you're going through a divorce or your parent just died. Like there are so many things in life that we face that are stressful. And if even if things are going really well at work, if life is really, really beating you down, then it's going to affect how much reserves you have to show up with to your job, right? So we're
Yeah.
looking at all of these different things that come together and how they are affecting you in your day to day life, whether it's at work or at home, right? How it's affecting your health. Are you not able to sleep? What's going on with your mood and your relationships and everything. So it's really about taking that step back and looking at that. And finally, we
Yeah.
have the third bucket, which is your personality. So what are you bringing to the table? And people often
Mm.
miss this, Rollis, right? Because they're very quick to say, it's my job, it's my industry, it's they're asking me to do too much, it's not possible. I've recently worked with a client who came in actually having that exact mentality. She was very bitter, very resentful, which we see a lot of in burnout. And when I explained to her the kind of work that we do together, she was very upset with me. Like, why should I have to work on myself when it's my industry that's the problem? And that's just, I think, demonstrative of the fact that we aren't really aware of what it is that we bring to the table. But fast forward, we've now worked together. She's gone through my entire 90-day program. She's a different person. She's learned so much about herself, about how it's her perfectionistic tendencies that contribute to her working overtime. It's how she has this need to control things or this need to prove something that make her work that much harder. It's that need to please other people that is leading her to go above and beyond what she's asked to do instead of thinking about the consequences of spending more time and energy at work when she could be doing other things for herself. So we end up coming into work with this mindset and this way of just thinking about ourselves and what it means and what we're trying to really, it's like a way of us getting our needs met, right? Like if we don't feel
Right.
worthy and we work really hard, then maybe we'll get that need met where people will pat us on the back and say, wow, you did such a great job, this is amazing. Or we get a raise and it makes us feel like, okay, I've arrived. But truly, it's so temporary that it doesn't last. So we keep pushing, right? So until we really address these issues once and for all, we're not going to really feel the difference that it makes in our lives, where it's becoming a perpetual pattern. So these are just some examples, but when I say personality, really what I've done is I've narrowed it down to three prototypes, if you will. And so I'm happy to share those if that's helpful, because I like to give people a framework so that they can
Yeah,
really
but
find themselves in the story, and see how they can also find very customized solutions to turning it around.
absolutely.
Because as we said, burnout can be so different for everybody.
So let's come back to that. But I want to make sure I want to make sure I've absorbed what you've already gone through. So
Sure.
programming was the first one, and I missed the second label. And the third one I know was personality. What was the second one again?
So that's our environmental stressors.
Environmental. That's right, environmental. Okay. So before we move on, I want to look at some of these comments that we have, and then I want to pick up with the discussion of the strategies because that's going to be important. So thank you very much. We got let's see, Trevor and Stephanie and Joanne, Esther. Thank you, Esther. Esther says, whatever pressure you face at home, if not properly handled, rubs off on others at work, and the quickest way to burnout. Nice. So she appreciated your thought on that. And guys, if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll make sure and read those. So we're kind of setting a stage here as to there's those three buckets that you talked about that could be affecting things. And yes, I want to talk about strategies on how we can kind of start to map out getting out of that. Is there anything in particular, though, before we get into that, is there anything in particular out of those three that seems to be the most dominant? Or are they all equally, do you prioritize them all equally the same?
It's not that it's most dominant, but I think we want to look at burnout as a recipe. And so these are different ingredients, and you can't have burnout, like, in other words, it could be just one of these or it could be all three, right?
Ah, okay.
Like, it could be that you have a certain belief system, and your mother was just diagnosed with cancer, and your friend just miscarried her baby, and your boss is really stressed out and taking it out on you, and that you have this tendency to
Right.
people please. Like, it could be so many things, right?
Yeah, or one,
Yeah.
or it
So
could be one. Okay, got it.
exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so let's go over what you were going to go over earlier with those three different strategies. I think it was three strategies you said.
Oh, the personality types.
Yeah, personality types. Thank you. Three personality types. Yes.
Yeah, so as I did some research on people who have burned out, and I tried to kind of condense people's burnout profiles, or their stories into very distinct categories. And the reason I thought this is important is so that you can kind of decode your own burnout and figure out, like, what is my prototype? What is my personality profile that is maybe contributing to burnout? Because, when we say environmental stressors, like, each one's going to find what it is that's going on for them. But it's important for us to have more self-awareness about ourselves when it comes to personality traits that are going to follow us around everywhere we go. So the answer isn't necessarily to go change positions and to run away from our problems. We have to look at what it is that we're bringing to the table. So I went through all of these people's profiles in terms of their stories, what has led them to burn out, the kinds of things that they talked about, and then also what were the strategies that were helpful to them. And I think it's important to find like-minded individuals who have burned out, and if you can align with their story, the things that have helped them may be helpful to you as well.
Of
So
course.
yeah, so what I came up with was, we have the thinker. And those are people
Okay.
who tend to overanalyze a lot of things. They live very much in their head. They tend to be very self-critical. They are more likely to be perfectionistic. So they have these very high standards they're trying to meet, which puts a lot of pressure on them. And so they're always going to iterate and reiterate everything that they do. Work takes a lot longer as a result. As I mentioned with my client, I was seeing that sort of behavior. And so she ended up spending an extra 2 to 3 hours above and beyond what was expected of her at work. And guess what happened is she didn't have enough time to have a life outside of work because she spent
Mm,
all her extra time at the office. And
right.
so then she was under the impression that it was because it was impossible to get the work done in less time and it was really a problematic industry. But when we zeroed in on it, she was able to see that it was because she was demanding so much of herself. She wanted everything to be exactly the way she thought it should be, that it should be perfect. She was trying to really make sure she kind of dotted her I's and crossed her T's,
Mm-hmm.
in a very specific way. Those unrelenting standards were really getting in the way. And so when we were able to dial that back, all of a sudden she had extra time on her hands, and she was able to go home and have a proper dinner and spend some time with friends and just relax on the couch and not give everything to work, that by the time she gets home she basically has to go to sleep and do it all over again the next day, right?
Right.
So those are the people who, like I said, are very much in their head. So if that's you, there are some things that, would be super helpful to dial that down. One of which I think is actually very hard for the thinker, which is self compassion, right? When you have those
Mm.
really high relenting standards, you're not compassionate with yourself. And as a matter of fact, when my client was able to do something good, she never praised herself. But whenever she made a mistake or she messed something up, she would say the worst things in the world to herself. She was beating
Yes.
herself up terribly. And I said to her, if you treated your friends the way you treat yourself, you would have no friends.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I've
You
been around
know?
someone like that too. That's a great point. Okay, so I'm curious, those who are watching the comments, would you consider yourself to be what she's terming as a thinker? Is that kind of your personality? You tend to really think through things. Maybe it takes you a little bit longer to go through a problem because you're trying to think about all the scenarios. I would imagine that person puts out some really quality work when it does come out. But
Well,
at the same time, it takes longer.
well, sometimes, but here's the problem with the perfectionist is that because they have this very black and white way of thinking about things, sometimes if they don't believe it's possible for them to do things the way they think they should be or perfect enough, or whatever their notion is of their standard, then they give up, and that's where we see a lot of procrastination, a lot of
Ah,
avoidance,
yes,
and feeling really
yes.
stuck and unsatisfied.
Would you okay? But so now I notice you use the word perfectionism or something to that effect. Do you equate a thinker with a perfectionist? I mean, are you automatically putting those in the same bucket, or can you be a thinker, not necessarily a perfectionist?
Exactly. So you can be a perfectionist. You don't have to be. I think there's different variations of thinkers, but that definitely the perfectionist goes under that bucket. But there can be other versions, and that includes like just people who tend to be very self-critical and beat themselves up, and they have that negative voice that they listen to all day long that tells them how much they suck and how they'll never amount to anything and how nobody cares about them. And those kinds of messages are very negative and they can really drag you down, and it's no wonder that you're burning out if this is what you're listening to all day long.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so let's move on. So we talked about the thinker, who may or may not be a perfectionist, but they're definitely a
Right.
thinker. And I would also imagine that those folks have a trouble with posting regularly on social media because they're going to want every post to be absolutely perfect with no mistakes, right?
Well, there's a lot of things that they hold themselves back from. They're playing small in a lot of ways because they feel like no matter what they do, it's never good enough. So I had one client who would take about uh, six, she would read over every email before she sent it out to her team about six times over because she was worried she may have made a grammatical mistake, that she didn't want people to
Mm, yeah.
really see something. So she was dealing more like maybe there's some perfectionism, but it was also that imposter syndrome, which is very
Yes,
common in the thinker
that's
as
real.
well. So there was a lot of that anxiety of what if I make a mistake? Then they'll realize that I don't deserve to be here, that this is, they'll realize that they've made a mistake, right? And
Yeah.
so there was always that need for checking and rechecking on everything to make sure that she didn't reveal the truth, quote unquote, about herself to other people. It was like
Yeah.
living and, like I know the truth that I really don't deserve to be here, but they haven't realized it yet, and they might realize it tomorrow. So I got to watch my every step. And so you're constantly overthinking everything that you do because you don't want to fall into that trap.
That is powerful. Yeah, absolutely. I've observed that big time. Okay, so let's move on to the next. What's the next personality type that you've observed?
Yeah, the second one is called the feeler. And that's
Okay.
somebody who is very emotional. So while the thinker is very much in their head, the feeler is like very emotional, very much in the heart. And so they are the people who are super empathetic and they feel other people's pain. So not only are they stressed out because of their own situation, but they are really embodying other people's stress and pain. So it really makes them want to help and put themselves out there. And then when people ask for help, they have a hard time with boundaries. They don't know how to say no. They worry about what other people might think of them. So they're always trying to do so much and give so much away. But then the other end of that stick is that then they end up feeling resentful because other people don't reciprocate in the way that they believe they should. So there's a lot of disappointment in other people. There's a lot of resentment that, hey, why am I doing all this stuff and nobody cares? Nobody actually does anything for me. And so all that resentment can actually lead to some burnout, in addition to the fact that you're giving away a lot of your time. So if you already have a full-time job and now you're doing other people's tasks because they've asked, now you're working overtime, and that takes time away from your ability to recharge your own batteries and live your life outside of work. So these are some of the challenges that the feeler faces.
Okay, I've got a great question coming from Esther. She says, Dr. Sharon, I find out that when I'm off work, I remember things I should tackle at work the next day or the next working week, and I put them down on reminders. Surprisingly, I get to work, started well on them, and then I go back, and then I go blank and burned out mentally, even though I know what I should be doing. What could be wrong here? What's she missing here?
So she's saying that she starts working on those tasks
Yeah, so when
and
she's
then,
off work, she thinks about things to do and she puts them down as reminders.
Mhm.
But then and she'll get start. She says she gets to work and she starts working well on them, but then she goes blank. And she feels burnt out mentally because she can't actually continue with the task. So it's like it's on her mind, but she's not sure how to follow through on it. So what are your thoughts on what could be perhaps some causes or triggers that are causing that?
Well, it could be a number of different things, but one of the things that we see when people are burned out is they're just cognitively and emotionally exhausted. And so it might be that mental fog that we experience when we're burned out, that even though you know that you're supposed to be working on something, you just can't find the ability to focus on it because you just don't have the reserves, right? I mean, I don't know much about her situation, but that could be one of the contributing factors there. It could be just as like she's already burned out, and that's why it's hard for her to maintain that level of focus that she needs. Um, but certainly feel free to put more details in the chat and we can dig a little deeper into it.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah. So you heard that, Esther. So we'll look out for more comments for you from you. Now, okay, so we talked about the thinker and we talked about the feeler. How about
Yep.
the third one?
So the third one is the doer. So that's your classic person who pushes themselves really hard. They tend to be your workaholic, the person who feels like no matter what they do, it's never enough. So it's different from the thinker. And you're looking around. So, the thinker feels like no matter what I do, it's not good enough. So they're really focused in on quality. Whereas the doer is focused on quantity. Like, I'm not doing enough. I should be doing more. And feeling guilty that you're not doing enough. And then there's this notion that if only I just get through this project, then things will be fine. So even when people tell you, listen, you've been working too hard, you're putting in way too much. I can see how this is taking a toll on you. You might actually push back and say, like, they don't understand. Like, I just need to get through this right now. And after that, things will quiet down, everything will calm down. I'll get back to normal, but I just got to do this. Right. And so you're very driven. And the thing is, you have this kind of false way of thinking that at some point you will have arrived, right? We call that the arrival fallacy. And as they like to say, there is no there, right? You don't actually ever get to a point, if you're that doer, that you will ever like slow down and do less, because it's just not in your nature, right? And this goes back to your programming. The reason that you do as much as you do, and you are so compelled to prove yourself and to do so much, is because of a certain belief system, because of something that you really have conditioned yourself to believe, right? Or that you were
Yeah.
conditioned by life. It could be like that you grew up with parents who required you or expected of you to perform to a certain level. And it just got tied in with, this is how I am worthy. This is what I need to do in the world because this is the expectation, right? You start to
Yeah.
expect that of yourself. So it's I of all the different types I've found, and this is totally anecdotal, this is not research proven, but I found that the doers actually burn out the most severely because what they'll find is they push really hard, their body starts to fall apart, and they're the last ones to listen because they have that
Mm.
need to constantly push. So when the
Yeah.
body is like aching and you start to develop all these issues health wise, it's kind of like your friend or your spouse telling you, listen, you're doing too much. And you're like, I'll deal with that later. Like that
Yeah.
pain that I have going on, or that stress that I'm feeling, like that pain in my chest, or, that headache, that migraine, or whatever is going on for me in terms of my health. Like I got to push through that because I got to finish this
Right.
project. And these are the people that end up, when they take it really too far, are the ones, like the worst case scenarios that I've seen are the ones who get hospitalized multiple times. They develop autoimmune diseases, which is really your body basically screaming at you, telling you that you have to stop. That, listen, I've been whispering to you all this time and you haven't listened.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
now I'm just getting louder and louder until you hear what I have to say. And then ultimately, we sometimes see people who get to the point where they're just suicidal because for some reason they've really dedicated their whole life to doing all this work and now they can't. And if your whole identity is wrapped around this notion of doing and now you can't, then it really leaves you kind of wondering, then who the hell am I and what's the point? If I can't be
Yeah.
that person, I can't do all these things, I'm worthless, then my life is worthless, then what's the point of living? And then we actually see people uh, that are driven to suicide as a result of burnout. Those are the most extreme cases.
Well, I can tell you this. There was a crossroads that I hit several years ago. We had had some little bumps in the road in the business, and I was internalizing it so much that and I didn't realize that I was getting sick more often. And so one of the times I went to the doctor, I got like a bronchitis or something like that. And they normally just check your pressure and everything. So they checked my pressure, and it was like way too high. It was like on the 150s on the top end, and the bottom one was like over 100. She was like, "Look, you're gonna have to either go to the hospital or get this thing regulated pretty quick." And so it really scared me because I had never had any kind of issues like that. And so I started to make a decision. I was like, okay, it's not going to be my job or my life kind of thing. I'm
Yeah.
not going to let the job, determine my health and my life. So I'm going to have to do some sort of disconnect there. And so I mentally made that disconnection where I'm not going to let this thing distress me to that degree. And I made obviously some lifestyle changes, changed up my diet, and took some supplements and things. And since then, I've been able to work it out because I am able to some point kind of cut it off. But and I realize not everybody can do that. They're not able to have that kind of stuff. Or maybe they don't get a wake up call like that. Maybe it's a much more severe than that. But I definitely saw there has to be a way for me to somehow compartmentalize Now, where you see me doing a little bit of overwork would be like if it's late at night and I thought of something with the business, kind of what Esther's talking about. I'm just going to go ahead and maybe just go ahead and hit that email or do that thing and just move on. So that's probably somewhere I probably do need to do a little extra work. Esther did do a follow up. She says, "Yeah, the more I look at my to do list, the more I just don't feel like continuing on them. At some point, I get away from my desk, laptop, and go to coworkers' corners to catch some laughs, to relax my head. It tends to work, but it's recurrent." So when a person starts to feel like they don't feel like to continue to work on those things on the to-do list, does that mean the to-do list is too big? It's the wrong to-do list? And what are some feedback you can give Esther to kind of give her some ideas here?
Well, so there's two potential things here. One is that the way that she's working may not be working for her. And I typically see that with people who have to-do lists in general. When we have to-do lists, they can, whether you're burned out or not, right? They can feel like this overwhelming thing that never gets done. And there's always another thing to put on. Like you never finish your to-do list. Like there's always a million things on there. So it can feel like it's never going to be done. It's just too much for you. It's so stressful. It's hanging over your head, and if that's the case, then it's really about strategy, which is more of a kind of time management issue. And then we can talk about like how to turn your to-do lists into pre-scheduled activities on your calendar so you know exactly when you're going to get them done, as opposed to, oh, I got to find some free time in my calendar so I can finally get to the items on my list, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that could be a preventative strategy. But if she's feeling the way that she is because she's already burned out, then that's a whole other conversation,
Ah, right, right. Okay,
right?
so one of the things that I've done, and I don't know if this may not apply to everybody, but if something stays on my to do list too long, that's a sign that I need to delegate it in some way. Either someone on my staff or I outsource it or contract, whatever. But it's obviously not going to get done by me, so I'm going to have to move on and just let somebody else help me with it. What are
Yeah,
your
and
thoughts on
and
that?
I think that's a perfect strategy. I think sometimes we have this idea of we need to get so much stuff done, but ultimately, maybe there are things that you don't like to do. And Esther, that was the other thing I was going to say is maybe it's not just about I have all these things to do, but the things that are on my list I'm not very excited about. Then do you really need to get those done? Like, what would happen if those things never got done? Then you can just delete them from your list. Or if they are important, but you're not excited about them, then how can you find someone else to do them for you? And that's where you either hire a virtual assistant or I don't know if you're an entrepreneur or you work for a company, but like you want to find someone to take that task over. So if you work for a company, you might talk to your manager and say, you know what, I have these 10, 12, 50, 100 things on my list, and these are the ones that I really would prefer not to do. Let's brainstorm about how someone else might be able to do it better, right? So that I can focus on the things that I do best, which are these other 50 things, right? So
Yeah,
you want to really focus your time and energy on the things that excite you so you don't end up like the people I talked about in my story that felt that work was a drag and they weren't excited to go to work every day. Like you want to think about what would make my work so fulfilling that I would be jumping out of bed in the morning to go do it, as opposed to, ugh, not another day.
right, exactly. So Esther, hopefully that helps you with what we said about your question. So thank you for that question, and any others who have questions, feel free and keep piping those in. We will consider them as best we can. There's one thing I wanted to cover before this was over, and it had to do with those who have burned out, but they were able to use some strategies to help them get beyond it and succeed to a similar or a greater level after burnout. Can you give us a couple of examples and maybe point to some strategies that they made along the way, that they took along the way to help them to bounce back?
Yeah. So, for instance, I had a client who he was a physician and he'd have some really long shifts, and on certain days of the week he would come home quite late, and he was just spent. And he was like, on those days, I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't care if like my kids are going to bed, like I don't want to spend time with them. I don't want to talk to my wife. I just want to like have my dinner. I want to relax on the couch and I want to go to sleep. He was also an introvert, so introverts have very unique needs, which need to be accounted for, which is that when they're engaging in meetings or seeing patients all day long and things of that nature, they are constantly expending energy, and that's very depleting for them. So they actually
Yes.
need some alone time to recharge their batteries. So that's what he was essentially aware of. He needed some time like by himself, not to be like jumped on by his kids at the end of the day when he's already depleted, right? um,
Right.
so I think one of the tips is, first of all, to know whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, and to really gauge kind of what your battery level is and what do you need in this moment to recharge. And then taking that even a step further. So I asked him, so then what do you do when you're by yourself at the end of that day? So he said that he would sit on the couch and watch some Netflix. And I said, there's nothing wrong with that. But let me ask you this question. When you get up off that couch at the end of your movie or whatever it is that you're watching, how do you feel? Do you feel more energized or about the same as when you sat down? And what he found was that he actually felt less energized after Netflix than he felt when he first sat down. And that was obviously a big problem because his goal in sitting on the couch was just to veg so that he could feel better, he can feel more energized, and it was actually having the opposite effect. So I think we have to be strategic in the activities that we engage in, that if we're looking to recharge our batteries, we do things that are going to replenish us as opposed to really take more out of us.
Wow, that is interesting. And I'm thinking, as you said that about Netflix, I'm wondering what kind of programming is he watching too, because I would imagine that probably has a lot to do with it as well. Because depending on what programming it is, it could take you down a bad a bad spiral where
Exactly.
you don't want to deal with the kids after that. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's definitely something to be said for the type of programming that you watch, especially like one of the things we know is if you're the kind of person who doesn't like thrillers or horror films and you're watching that, then you might have nightmares. It might make it hard for you to fall asleep or to stay asleep, right? Then you're going to avoid watching those kinds of things because it just takes so much out of you. So maybe you're not watching, maybe what you need to do after work is watch a comedy because it'll make you laugh and it'll help you feel just like a little bit lighter about the day. So I think there could be something about like the type of programming that you're watching, but also how long are you watching for?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
how do you feel? Ultimately, the way you'll know is you just ask yourself, how do I feel when I get up off that couch, right? And I think it's always good to assess your before and after. So how energized was I? Let's say I was going to give it 0 to 100%. When I sat on that couch, if I was at a 20%, I was pretty depleted. What I need right now is something to charge me up a little bit. I need more juice, right?
Yeah,
Then
yeah,
maybe I watch that comedy and I laugh and I get up off that couch. I'm at a 40, then I know it worked. But if I'm watching that thriller and now I'm all anxious and I've already felt stressed all day, now I'm at a 10, then it's not working.
yeah, yeah. That's a great point. Okay, so you given an example of that person. Once he made that adjustment, how did that affect his situation?
But what was so cool was to hear how I love when people take concepts and then they really become very creative with them, how they apply them in all areas of their lives. And so he was able to start thinking very strategically about what he needs in every moment of the day. So even at work, when he was going through his day and he was seeing patients and then he had meetings or he had notes to catch up on or he had to make phone calls, he would first check in with himself and say like, where is my battery right now? What do I need? And maybe it was just taking 5 minutes to just breathe and just sit and relax. Maybe it was going for a walk around the block. Maybe it was to call his wife and have a quick chat and kind of check in and make that human connection. So I think that when you have that creative juice and you can take that strategy of constantly checking in with yourself and seeing what do I need, and more specifically, like where is my battery now from that 0 to 100, and what do I need in this moment, then you can find really in the moment solutions that can be helpful. And I think that's such an important strategy because our needs can change throughout the day. It's not like, oh, if I'm an introvert, I always need to be by myself. No, we need balance. So you need to spend some time with people and other time by yourself. If you spend too much time by yourself, you're going to feel disconnected. You're going to feel lonely. I mean, even introverts, right, need to spend time with other people. And then if you're an extrovert, it's not like I spend all my time with other people because then you don't have that balance. So then you need to think about what can I do by myself to just recalibrate? Like maybe being with people, even as an extrovert, all the time is too much, right? And then I notice that
Right.
my battery level starts to drop. So what are some things that I can do on my own? Maybe I journal, or maybe I go for a walk. I listen to a podcast. I do a sport that is very individual, like I go for a jog by myself, or I go for a swim, right? So just finding that balance, knowing what your needs are, and adjusting your activities very strategically based on those needs in that moment is very helpful.
Like that. By the way, Esther gave her feedback. She says, I think the strategic calendar pre schedule thing is a go. I'll try that instead of trying to do all successively. I delegate well. Thanks, y'all. So she
Excellent.
feels like yeah, that was good. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and
Um,
this is exactly my point of like why I chose to work with people who are very motivated and high achievers, is because like they take something and they run with it. And it's such a joy to work with people like that, that they're looking for ways to improve, and when they find the answer, they implement it right away.
yes, absolutely. No, I love that too. Okay, so I want to. There's been a conversation from a. This is something I want to ask you about. There's been a conversation about work-life balance versus work-life fit, and so before we close, I wanted to get your thoughts on that whole term. Is it realistic to have work-life balance, or is it work-life fit is a better term? But what are your thoughts on that whole thing?
Well, it's funny that you say that because I've actually never heard the term work life fit. I've heard work life integration. And look, I think at
Okay.
the end of the day, these are just terms, right? It's what you make them mean that is important. And one of the things that I've found is that the reason people are kind of allergic to the idea of work life balance is because they think of balance, they define that term to mean that it has to be this 50-50 split between your work and your life. And they're like, that's not possible because my work expects me to be there, for 10 hours a day or 8 hours a day. And I have to sleep. And so there's not enough left over by the time you take out, meals and travel time and sleep. Like there's just not enough time for it to be 50-50. So that's impossible. So let's not even talk about work life balance. And what I want to say is that you have to think about balance not in terms of quantity, but more in terms of quality. So, what that means is even if you work a 10-hour shift, it doesn't mean that you then need 10 hours not to work. What it means is that maybe instead of just being in this work mode the entire 10 hours, that you take breaks and you check in with yourself, and that you eat well, and you make sure that you sleep the night before, and that you do things to de-stress. That's work life balance, is like having all of the pieces taken care of so that you are taking care of your needs. So we're back to that. We're kind of like back to this idea of getting my needs met. Ultimately, that's what we always have to come back to. And the question is, what is it going to take for you? Now, sometimes we have, especially with the doers, the people who don't take their vacations and they just work and work and work and work. And they're like, oh, I'll relax when I get on vacation. But actually, what happens is if you're a doer, then chances are, even when you get to your vacation, which you often forego, then you're the kind of person who probably likes to see everything when you're in a new place and you're not the one relaxing on that vacation, right? I'm guilty of that. I like to explore and see things, but then I find that I've planned too much stuff and I'm going to see all the things. And I'm actually so tired at the end of the day when I'm like, I kind of need a vacation from my vacation just to kind of
Right,
recalibrate,
right.
you know?
Okay, now I'm not guilty of that one. I'm not good. I thought you were going to say that the doer is the type that when they go on vacation, they find themselves looking at their email and
Oh,
doing
without
a
a
little
doubt.
bit of work stuff.
Without a doubt. I mean, that goes without saying, right? But I think it's a rare case when we as high achievers aren't checking our work email, aren't thinking about work, and that sort of thing. But I think when we're talking about balance, it's about, you know, even if you think about the time that you're on and the time that you're off, right? If you're working, let's say there's 52 weeks in a year, and you're the average American that gets 2 weeks off a year, you might say 50 versus two, that's not balanced. But it's not about it being like an exact split. It's more about like the quality of the experience, right? So
Yeah,
you
makes
don't need to
sense.
have that much time off and that many hours off. It's really about like as you go through your day, what are you doing to take care of yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I agree. So Joshua's coming in. He says, "For me, my needs don't change. My thoughts change.
Hmm.
60 to 70K thoughts run across our minds every day. So I try and guard what I let in and how I deal with them accordingly." Thank you for that, Joshua. And Esther says, "Looks like I'm a thinker." She's a thinker. So, what are
Hmm.
your thoughts on Joshua's comments?
He sounds like a thinker who's working on himself. Somebody who's like aware of the tendency to think in a certain way and is working to change that. And I
Yeah,
applaud you for being that self-aware and for doing the work to turn it around because it's not easy.
that's the truth. That's hard work. And I remember, I think it was Earl Nightingale, one of them, one of those people I used to watch. But he says that thinking is the hardest work there is. There's so much effort that goes behind thinking because sometimes we just don't stop and think. We just react. React throughout the We react to this situation, react to that situation, but we never really stop and fully meditate or think about things. And so that's why he says thinking is the hardest work. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that number one is we are born reactive and it's our job to train our brain to be more mindful so that we can make better decisions. And while we do a lot of thinking, as he was mentioning, we have like 60,000 thoughts a day. What we spend very little amount of time on is thinking about our thoughts. So it's really about being strategic about how do I want to feel? And
Mm-hmm.
when I think this thought, what is it doing to me? Like we often think that it's our circumstances that are creating our results, right? Like the reason I'm upset is because you said this thing to me or you did this thing to me. And it's more about what do I think about what you did that is creating the feeling that I now have and taking responsibility for ourselves. And that I
Yeah.
think is a lot more empowering than waiting for somebody to do what you want them to do because we don't have control over other people. We don't have control over our circumstances, but we do have control over the dialogue that goes between our ears.
Unless you're in the Marvel universe. In the Marvel universe, some of them can do that. Just kidding. All right, guys. Thanks for all the comments that you guys put in. Let us know what resonated with you from what you heard today. from Dr. Sharon. And Sharon, Dr. Sharon, I want to thank you for being on today. This is a very insightful discussion. I know you've got lots more to share, especially in your book. And Joanne, if you can, let's put a link to that. Is it on? Is it a separate website, or should you just go to your LinkedIn profile for that?
So they can find it on my website. They can find it on Amazon. It's called the 7E Solution to Burnout. And I also recommend people who are interested in diving a little deeper into the three factors that we talked about, specifically your programming, your environmental stressors, and your personality. I actually have a podcast now where I am actually decoding other people's burnout.
Oh,
So
cool.
they come on, they share their burnout story, and I will actually highlight what it was that maybe had led them to burnout, given those three factors. So you can check that out at Decode Your Burnout. And then finally, if you're listening to this, you're wondering, how am I doing? Am I burned out? What do I need to focus on? What stage of burnout am I in? Then I've got a free resource for you. You can download it from my website. It's drsharongrossman.com/burnout checklist. So it's, again, it's a checklist
Okay.
where you can have that quick win, where you can check in with yourself and really get some ideas about how you're doing and what you need to focus on.
Well, I'm going to do that. I'm gonna see how I do on that checklist there, and I'm going to see what our audience thinks of all those different resources you just mentioned. I think they appreciate it, and they appreciate you just as I do.
Oh,
Thank you
thank
very
you,
much for being
really.
on today. And folks, thank you for watching and participating. Even if you're watching the replay, we want to hear from you as well. Let us know your thoughts on this subject, and please, by all means, reach out to Dr. Sharon. She can help you with any of those issues you're facing, whether you feel like you're approaching burnout or if you're trying to recover from burnout.
Yeah.
Definitely take a look at what she's got. Well, thanks everybody for watching. Let's say bye to everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for being here, watching. Take care. Be well.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So we're going to stay on for just a second, and then Joanne is going to let us know when it's safe to hit the end stream button. And by the way, your clips, I've already used a couple of clips from our first conversation. I put it on TikTok, and it is like getting lots and lots of likes. Actually, I don't know if you've checked it out yet,
Fantastic.
but
Amazing.
yeah, one of the clips from our conversation that we had a couple of months ago. And we'll do
Wonderful.
some clips from this today too. So it was a really good session. Thank you very much. I'm
Thank
also
you.
seeing some folks that are putting the little likes and reactions in now. Thank you for doing that, guys. And tag someone if you think it'll help someone else. Definitely put the like button on there, or happy, or the applause button, or love, whatever. But thank you for being here today.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me. It was a joy. And it's always nice to have that audience participation. I think it makes it that much more relevant.
Absolutely, it makes it better.